I'm going to call this a tribute to Denmark because we all saw what happened. We all know exactly what happened with the Danish players and what happened with Christian Eriksen, and we know that this was quite frankly a worst case scenario for the Danish. But let's be honest, very few teams would have handled adversity the way that this Danish side did. And it all starts with the leadership. You take a look at the leadership that this team has, and it all starts to make sense. Simon Kjær, the captain, Kasper Schmeichel. He is as level-headed as can be in these types of situations. I personally didn't know this, but apparently Kasper Schmeichel was in between all the ruins after that helicopter crash that killed the owner of Leicester City 3 years ago. He was helping. This man was helping. He was trying to rescue people. He's made for adversity. That's basically what I'm trying to say. He is made for adversity. And what about the gaffer? What about the manager, Kasper Hjulmand? My goodness. Again, we talk about level-headedness and we talk about the leadership. Kasper Hjulmand is everything. He is everything that you want in a leader. And apparently, something else that I didn't know, he dealt with something similar earlier in his career, similar to what happened to Christian Eriksen. So now he has to go through something similar again, and he deals with it almost flawlessly. As good as you can deal with something as serious and as traumatic as this. He dealt with it ridiculously well. And of course it was going to translate to the players. Because if the guy up top, if the manager is a good leader, he's going to lead by example. And he led by example. And what an example he gave. He galvanized this team. The leaders in Denmark galvanized this team. Again, I mentioned Simon Kjær. I mentioned Kasper Schmeichel. Without those galvanizing leaders, I do think that this team would have fallen apart like that. And it did feel for a second that maybe they were going to fall apart. But that game against Russia was almost a notice for the rest of the world. Like, hey, we're okay. We have a bigger reason that we're doing this for. And obviously, that bigger reason was Christian Eriksen. But let's be honest. This road that the Danish had to go through to get all the way to the semifinal this past Wednesday was probably one of the toughest roads that any team has ever faced in any tournament. It seemed so unlikely for them to be playing that game at Wembley on Wednesday, yet they were there and they competed. Again, it all started with Christian Eriksen's incident. We all know what happened with Christian Eriksen. And then a couple hours later, they had to come back and they had to play. And they lost that game, which, can you blame them? No, you can't blame them because they saw their teammate pretty much die right in front of them. No one's going to have the head to play a game, okay? No one's going to have the head to play a game 2 hours after the fact. And then the next game they lose to Belgium when they were up 1-0 at the half. We all know what happened. Kevin De Bruyne, masterclass. And then, of course, they had to score a certain amount of goals against Russia. They did it, and they advanced to second place. And I know a lot of people are talking about, well, if you lose 2 games in the group stage, you shouldn't have a chance to advance, and that kind of rhymed. Well, Denmark advanced as a second place in the group. They advanced as a number 2. So even if this format was still only the top 2 per group qualify, they would have qualified regardless. So that argument is a little bit invalid. And then we keep going forward. They have to go to Baku, all the way to Baku. I've only heard bad things about traveling to Baku or the logistics. Nothing wrong with Azerbaijan or Baku. I don't know enough to have a judgment. Never been there, of course. But the logistics of traveling to Baku and then having to go back to London or wherever they had to go back to, any team I'm talking about now, it wasn't very smart from UEFA to pick Baku as one of the cities, but they had to go there and they had to play in Baku. And it was very, very hot that Saturday when they played the quarterfinal. And then we look at what they did on Wednesday. You don't even have to look at the result, or you really don't even have to look at the last 30, 40 minutes of the game because Denmark was very tired and they were very sloppy and it felt like they were just simply running out of battery towards the end, which is okay. It's fine. But you look at what they did. They scored the first goal against England in the entire tournament. England conceded for the first time in the entire tournament in the semifinal against Denmark. And a beautiful free kick. Oh, by the way, Mikael Damsgaard scored the first free kick goal of Euro 2020. The youngest player to score a free kick in the European Championships. Of course, it had to be a Danish player. And they really had the English scared. They had them running. They had them trembling. It wasn't easy for England. It took extra time. But even to get back into the game for England, it was difficult because Denmark was pressing well and they were doing what they had to do. And then, of course, eventually talent takes over and fresh legs take over. England hasn't played an extra time up until, well, they haven't played one yet. And Denmark played, they hadn't played an extra time either, but they did have to travel to Baku, which somewhat feels like an extra time. Regardless, I'm not making any excuses for Denmark. Oh, excuse me. I'm not making any excuses for Denmark, but that's how it went for them. It was some true adversity that they had to face. It wasn't like, oh, we were down every game and we had to make a comeback and this and that. Yeah, of course, that's adversity. But the adversity, we know what they had to go through and they still overcame it. What surprised me the most about this Danish team isn't necessarily that they got all the way to where they got. What surprised me was how fun they were to watch. And I don't know if it was because they actually have a fun style or because we were just so attracted to the story. We were glued to our televisions every single time that Denmark was playing because we knew something special was going to happen. I got that feeling from a couple of teams in this Euro. Italy and Spain. And then if you add Denmark, then that's not a couple of teams anymore. But it was those three teams that made me feel like something special was on its way. And you look at, or at least you compare the three squads and you see, well, Denmark isn't as talented as Italy, as Spain. Yet they were still producing incredibly exciting moments and they were looking for the results. They were pursuing the result. They weren't just sitting back and trying to hit you on the break. They were pursuing these goals. They were pursuing the result, and they got it. They absolutely got it. And you see the free-flowing football in attack. Then, of course, you see those reliable midfielders, Thomas Delaney, Pierre-Emile Højbjerg. And then in defense, they have three towers. I mean, what can you really say? The average height in that defense is like 6'4" or something like that. That's ridiculous. You have a massive advantage, no pun intended. You have a massive advantage there when your defenders tower over the opposing attackers. And of course, when you have one of the greatest goalkeepers in the world protecting your net, of course you're going to feel safe. Of course. It's meant to happen. It's going to happen. And Kasper Schmeichel really did have a very, very good tournament. And it sucks that what we're probably going to remember the most about Kasper Schmeichel, of course, while he was playing, not necessarily what he did with Christian Eriksen's partner. What we're going to remember, or the last memory that we're going to have of Kasper Schmeichel in this tournament is saving the penalty, but giving up the rebound to Harry Kane to slot that one home. I know it sucks, but that doesn't take away from the fact that Kasper Schmeichel had a ridiculously good Euro. I do want to ask a question, and I don't mean to ask this question in a derogatory, negative, or insensitive way. I mean this in the most polite way possible. Would Denmark have gotten this far if Christian Eriksen was perfectly healthy? Me personally, I don't think so. I don't think this team would have thrived as much as they did with Christian Eriksen. I'm not saying that it's a good thing that this happened to Christian Eriksen. Of course not. It's not a good thing. If anything, we were all heartbroken, and we, at least for me, I still kind of go back and kind of think about what happened and where I was and what I was doing. I can never put myself through seeing those scenes again. I've seen it pop up on my YouTube recommendations, and I'm like, no, don't recommend this to me. Before, I haven't seen it lately. I'm sure those videos have been taken down. But regardless, I don't think that this Danish side would have been as good. They wouldn't have thrived as much as they did for really a couple of, or more than a couple of reasons. The first one, maybe they wouldn't have had such a big reason to play for someone. Of course, I mean, we really don't know what happens in these players' lives, but it wouldn't have been as galvanizing. It wouldn't have been or the team wouldn't have been as united as they were throughout the Euro after this Christian Eriksen incident. Another reason as to why I think that Denmark wouldn't have gotten as far as they did is that opposing defenses would have had a reference in Christian Eriksen. They would have had a reference. And when you look at the games against Belgium, the games against Russia and Wales, and who did they play in the quarterfinals? Jeez. And Czech Republic, there was no reference. Sure, Kasper Dolberg was playing, and Martin Braithwaite, and I cannot remember for the life of me who was playing down the left, but it wasn't Paulsen. Anyway, they didn't have a reference. They didn't have an attacking point of reference, where Christian Eriksen, we know that the ball has to go through him. The game has to go through him at all times, because that's the type of player that he is. And of course he's better with the ball in his feet. Of course he is, because he can pick out a pass like no one's business. But now, when you have just a bunch of good players and not one great player, well, that will throw off a defense just a little bit. But regardless, you got to congratulate Denmark. You have to congratulate Denmark for taking this horrific event and turning it into fuel and going all the way to a European semifinal. You can argue that they were robbed. You can argue that they were robbed against England. I do think that the goal was going to fall regardless. At some point, England was going to score in that extra time. It felt like that. But you cannot take away from what Denmark did in this tournament. That is an example of it's a life example. It's a life example. It doesn't matter how hard life may get. It doesn't matter how much adversity you might be facing. There's always a light at the end of the tunnel. You just got to remain positive. You got to unite. You got to be a good leader. You got to tell your people it's okay. We're going to be fine. And that's why Denmark thrived in this Euro.